Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start the presentation while a few folks are still coming in. We are talking today about systemic racism in research and work that's to be done to still build trust in communities of color. This is an amazing presentation. We actually have a guest speaker who will be doing the bulk of the workshop today, and I'll introduce her in just a second. But first, I'm just going to share with you the cheer team. Myself, Jess Abrams-Schrodel, Jennifer Posier, Andrea Murray, and Paula Moody. We're part of the cheer team, which is a community health, equity, and engagement and research team. And we are so glad you are all here. We are just thrilled to welcome everyone here today. Next, we're going to go on to introduce our guest speaker. Hattie McCarter is our guest speaker today. She is a certified DEI professional with over 14 years of experience in diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. She has 20 years of public speaking and over 7 years in human resources / recruitment. Hattie is the founder of the McCarter's Equitable and Distinctive, or MEND, Solutions, a consulting agency that equips businesses and organizations with tools in framing and integrating an equitable lens through practices, policies, and procedures. In addition to her consulting work, Hattie serves as a board member of the Diversity and Inclusion Professionals of Central Pennsylvania, or the DIPCPA. Hattie was also recently featured in Penn Live's Trailblazers and Trendsetters article. So actually, I think Paula's going to go ahead and throw that link to the article Hattie was just recently featured in into the chat. I think we're ready now to go ahead. Thanks, Paula, for taking care of that. Yep, we're going to go ahead on to the logistics before we pass it on to Hattie to start her presentation. Just a few things as far as housekeeping today. The presentation is being recorded, so you will all be sent a copy of that along with the actual PowerPoint and some additional resources that we always send it to everybody after the presentation.
Okay.
Within a day or two. We ask that you please raise your hand to ask any questions. Closed captioning is indeed enabled. So if you would like closed captioning, it is available. You can also turn it off. I think it's in your options within your Zoom box that you can shut it down to if you would like to. Please use the chat feature to make any comments, share resources, or make any connections. We really encourage this to be as interactive as possible. And again, the presentation materials will be shared after the session. As far as also the chat feature, just to let you know with the questions and things like that, we are going to have ample time near the end of the hour for everyone to be able to ask questions. So Hattie is our presenter is going to give plenty of time for that as well. So I think that's about it on my end. I think we are ready to go ahead and pass it on to Hattie McCarter. Thank you so much for being here, Hattie, and go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here with you all today. As just said, that my name is Hattie McCarter, and I'm a cisgender African-American Southern Belle from Enterprise, Alabama. I'm really humbled and honored to be here with you all today and sharing the space as the owner of Men, but also as the host of Tea with Hattie B, which is my YouTube channel. So do a little plug here. Please go like, follow, share, and subscribe. Episodes are going to start back being uploaded. I want to say back either in March or April. But before I move further, I definitely want to give another thanks to Jennifer, Paula, Jess, and Adrian, and the other members of CHEER for this opportunity and me sharing my heart and my lived experience. I really do feel like I am a part of the family. And so I just appreciate all the engagement and the thoughtfulness in putting this presentation together. So for the sake of time, I'm going to turn off my camera because I get distracted in looking at myself and looking at other people. So I'm going to turn my camera off, and then I'll come back on when we get ready to do our question and answer. So next slide for me. Okay. So Today, you will have the opportunity to add another tool to your knowledge belt of DEI. As you continue to grow your equity lens, today you're going to be able to understand systemic racism in communities impacted, identify the historical and current trauma that shifted the lens of marginalized communities, and strategies on how to reestablish trust and engage communities to partner in beneficial research. Now, I promise that I'm not going to bore you by reading these slides to you. That is a huge pet peeve of mine. However, there will be times when I read a quote or express some emphasis on certain points. So in the words of Homer Simpson, I came to lead and not read. Next slide for me. Hey. You'll hear me speak on a few terms that you may or may not be familiar with, and if there's something that resonates with you or really pushes you to learn, I strongly encourage you to do your research, for it's really important to stay abreast on specific terms that will assist you in your D&I journey. Next slide for me. All right. Now, I want to caution you, for we are about to get into the hot zone. This will be the tone for the remaining of our session and how I will continue to engage with you as a storyteller. We are here to be humble, open, and transparent, and be able to speak truth to power about the realities of marginalized communities. So if you're not in the mood to be like the infamous rapper Nelly and get hot up in here and open up your heart and your mind, then I humbly ask you to remove yourself, because it's really important that we protect the energy and respect others on this journey in wanting to become a partner and wanting to learn, unite, and grow in a culturally sensitive space. Now, please note that everybody is on a different journey and certain experiences may be triggering for you. I know that while I was doing this research, it was really hard for me to relive certain traumas in developing this presentation for you. So I definitely understand if there are certain things that are uncomfortable. So as we get hot, I want you to do a few things for me. First, give yourself permission to show up authentically and feel as a beautiful human being that's willing to be vulnerable and uncomfortable for things that you don't know, you want to know, or those things that you ignore because it doesn't impact you. Secondly, revisit your why you are who you are, and what's your purpose in life or the field that you have chosen. And thirdly, for my white brothers and sisters, I don't want you to leave this presentation apologizing to your BIPOC colleagues, spouses, friends, family members, or even research participants. This is a space that I really want you to cultivate an empathetic lens and cultural understanding of how distrust stems in these communities and how you can become or continue to be an accomplice in being equitable and inclusive. Woo, so I know that was a lot, but I wanted to set the tone for you all because it's really important as we get ready to engage in this space, especially when we're talking about systemic racism and how it has impacted communities of color. Next slide for me. Okay, so racism, it includes a complex array of social structures, interpersonal interactions, and beliefs by which some individuals of the dominant culture categorizes people in socially constructed races and has created a racial hierarchy in where racial and ethnic minority groups are disempowered, devalued, and denied equal access to resources. And it has caused them to have distrust, apprehension, and fear. Racism not only impacts communities of color generationally, it continues to impact us individually as well. Now, what I have for you here today is a diagram on the 4 levels of how racism operates. The first is intrapersonal racism, which lies within individuals. This can take on different forms, including prejudice towards others of a different race, internalized oppression, which is really the negative beliefs about oneself by people of color, or internalized privilege that is illustrated by superiority or entitlement by white people. Now, some examples that we can think about can be a form of microaggression or a new term that I was introduced
Uh-oh, you're on mute.
Hey, Hattie, I think you accidentally muted yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Where did I leave off at? I'll start over at interpersonal racism. Okay. So interpersonal racism is another level to where this is the bias that occurs when individuals interact with others and their personal racial beliefs affects their public interactions. So we've seen a lot of this escalated in the media with hate crimes, people calling on Black kids and men and women who are going to the grocery store, Black people being followed in restaurants, retail stores. It could be with job discrimination, housing discrimination, racial comments, racial profiling, and also the violence by police towards people of color. Thirdly, we have the institutional, which really occurs within institutions of power that provides unfair policies and discriminatory practices. And institutions could be schools, workplaces, government, all of the above. And within these institutions, they routinely produce racial inequitable outcomes for people of color and advantages for white people. Individuals within these institutions take on the power of the institution when they reinforce these racial inequities. An example could be, I just read an article a couple of days ago about the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who has moved to ban their DEI statements in an anti-woke backlash. Their reasoning for this was that they wanted to give their students an intellectual freedom to basically learn, and I quote, how conservative citizens represent an equal democracy. Or we can move forward to what Florida is doing now in trying to remove African American studies from the curriculum in school systems. So once again, institutional is really about power constructs and how that power is filtered down through different levels. Then lastly, we have structural racism, which is a racial bias among institutions and across society. So this involves the cumulative and compounding effect of an array of societal factors, including the history, the culture, the ideology, and interactions of institutions and policies that systemically privilege white people and disadvantaged people of color. So a prime example I could give is the Jim Crow laws that was established back in the day, and also the National Housing Act. So next slide for me. Now that you have an understanding as to how racism operates and is perpetuated throughout the lived experience of these communities, today I want us to focus on systemic form of racism. Now, there are a lot of times where DEI practitioners, we use structural and systemic, it can be interchangeable, but for today's purposes, we're going to consider it as systemic racism. Okay. Now, I want us to watch a quick video from one of our great scholars on TikTok. So you can play the video for me.
People need to stop complaining about systemic racism and take some personal responsibility. Everyone is equal under the law now. They may be policed more, but that's only because they commit a disproportionate amount of the crime. Why? Well, I'm not saying that Black people are naturally more likely to be criminals or anything. I just think it's a part of their culture. Why? Well, probably because their dads weren't around to raise them properly. Why? I don't know, probably because they were too poor to afford a kid, so they left. Why? Well, they probably can't get a good job because they never went to college. Why? Well, I guess it is probably because they couldn't afford it, but they didn't get good enough grades to get a scholarship either. Why? Well, I guess that is probably because their school is underfunded. Why? Because school funding is determined by property taxes and they were born into poor areas. Why? Because their family hasn't been able to build enough wealth to move out. Why? Because the first Black people who were born with equal rights under the law are less than 60 years old. Black people
Okay, so when I started doing the research for this presentation, I kid you not, this was the first video on my timeline. And I was just like, wow, this is really weird, because how did you know I was doing some research on this? But also I felt that it was right on point with certain things that this gentleman was saying. And also too, he had on a shirt from Alabama, so I gave him a little bit of grace. But I really think it's important to tie this video because it brings into our discussion about how systemic racism works in the BIPOC communities, and show that the more that you dig, you're able to reach and respect the foundation of the who, what, when, where, and most importantly, the why. And this video, it indicates the 4 levels of racism that I just talked to you about in the previous slide. Now, there were a few statements in here I was just like, maybe not so much, but for the most part, he was right on point. Okay. So systemic racism is universally and deeply embedded in and throughout systems, laws, written and unwritten policies, entrenched in practices, and established beliefs and attitudes that produce, condone, and disseminate unfair treatment of people of color. And it really reflects both ongoing and historical injustices and disproportionate accesses to opportunities. It has been implemented to control, exclude, exploit, and shame communities of color. But there is also systemic discrimination that involves persons with disabilities, veterans, people of the LGBTQIA+ community, those of different socioeconomic statuses, and much more. So next slide for me. All right. So here are 5 examples of systemic racism that I want to briefly discuss with you. First, we're going to talk about education. Now, with education, school districts with the most Black, Native, and Latino students get significantly less revenue than districts with fewer students of color. For districts with 5,000 students, they can mean losing $13.5 million. Now, the less funding means fewer computers, fewer teachers, outdated textbooks, rundown buildings. Even in schools with resources with the gifted program, it's still racial disparities as a whole. Next, we have employment. I think this can really resonate with a lot of us, that this is where it begins within the hiring process. Workplaces, we are still discriminating against people of color, especially women. Now, while white women earn about 79 cents of every white man's dollar, Black women earn 63 cents, while Hispanic women earn 58 cents. Black men earn about 71 cents per dollar. And according to a city report, the Black pay gap alone equals to about $2.7 trillion. All the lost income really leads to a higher rate of poverty within non-white communities. And according to the census data from 2019, Black and Hispanic Americans were overly represented in poverty compared to their representation within employment. Then we have home ownership. The National Housing Act of 1934 formalized redlining, which effectively provided housing to white families and left out people of color. I know a lot of times my mom was talking to me about the white flight that occurred when during the civil rights movement. And what happened, she talked about it more specifically when she was growing up, when her mom was trying to buy a home. So instead of getting to live in newly established suburbs, Black Americans and other people of color were segregated into urban housing projects. Now, according to the Federal Housing Administration, this was their reasoning for it. They stated that if Black Americans bought suburban homes, the property values would go down. This will put the loans of white Americans at risk. Another example could be gentrification. I'm not sure if some of you are from the Harrisburg area, but I don't know if you noticed that they just built the new U.S. courthouse. And during that time, they tore down everything. The more and more they are pushing the communities further out. And so they are building more higher cost apartments. new buildings, more government facilities. It really has evolved over the past couple of years, but as I sat there and watched them build this community, I'm like, what are happening to the people who have lived here for 30, almost 40 years, who are having to either move or give in to the incentive that they're paying them for them to continue to build these buildings. The criminal justice in 2020, a study using a data set with 100 million traffic stops across the US found that Black drivers are 20% more likely to get stopped than white drivers relative to their residential population. Once pulled over, Black drivers are then 1.5 to 2 times more likely to be searched than white drivers, despite the fact that they're less likely to be carrying drugs, guns, or any other illegal contraband. Now, Black youth are more than 4 times more likely to be detained or committed to juvenile facilities compared to their white peers. And according to a 2017 report, Black men got 19.1% longer sentences for the same federal crime than the white men between 2012 and 2016. And this accounted for the factors like criminal history, age, citizenship, and education. So I want to get a poll real quick. Can anybody tell me in the chat box the percentage of Blacks in jails and prison? So Jess or Jennifer wants to read that off for me. So I see 75, 65, 45.
Yep.
50, 75, 80%.
Oh, wow. Those are some good guesses. So
67%, just to keep it nice and round.
67%. Okay. So based off the recent study, now granted, the Black population makes up 13% of the US, but Black people make up 38% of the population in jails and populations in prisons. That speaks a lot of values. So I really want that to kind of resonate with you, especially off the information that I gave you about the criminal justice system. Now, the one that we're focusing more on today is going to be healthcare. The healthcare system has abused non-white people for centuries. It's prevalent, or it really has its own term now titled medical racism. Hiding behind the veneer of science and medicine, doctors and researchers in the 1800s promoted the ideas that the belief of the shape of a person's skulls related to their moral character, and that Black people were naturally submissive and therefore meant to be enslaved. Now, systemic racism in healthcare is still prevalent. It shows up in a lot of odd ways, such as the belief that Black patients feel less pain, and there have been studies that Black people are significantly less likely to receive pain medication, and when they do get it, we get a lesser dose. So when Baton professor and social psychologist Sophia Trauwalter, I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right, went to learn why, she found that the belief isn't always linked to negative feelings about race, but rather a belief that race is biological. So next slide for me. All right. So although there are more examples of systemic racism, however, I wanted to enhance your lens in really understanding how racism continues to impact the behaviors, the thought process, the lack of trust, and empathy regarding communities of color. These ingrained historical traumas that the BIPOC community has faced and continue to experience with medical professions, and the fact that we know that the benefit of certain systems did not have us in mind, which has resulted in a lot of distrust and apprehension in seeking treatment. Okay, next slide for me. So before you is a timeline of historical traumas that have been experienced and communicated through generations, which is the foundations for a lot of the distrust. I know that a lot of you have heard some of these, however, all are significant, but if there's some historical moments that you are aware of that I don't talk about today, please put them in the chat. In doing my research, my eyes, there were a lot of things that I had no idea about that happened before my time, during a time that my parents were growing up. So I really, really encourage you, if there's any other historical events that you feel that's relevant to this presentation today, please put it in the chat. I really want to learn more as much as I can. So now in 1600s, when Africans were stolen from their homeland to become enslaved and sold as property, doctors who were aboard took a cruel approach in treating our ancestors that were ill. Those who were sick were thrown overboard, in addition to being forced to take medication or food while being threatened by a whip, a pistol, or something else. Those enslaved, their jaws were pried open with torture instruments that would break their teeth and even choke them. The dehumanization of those enslaved became a normal part of the lived experience that would continue throughout our history. Those enslaved were experimented on by taking vomit-inducing medication or other forms for entertainment and research purposes. Some slaveholders and physicians forced Black women to participate in reproductive procedures without anesthesia. In the 1840s, a 17-year-old enslaved woman endured 30 surgeries. I definitely want to reiterate, she was 17 years old and endured 30 surgeries. And according to Dr. J. Marion Sims' biography, now in the 19th century, South, most cesarean sections were performed on African-American women when the operation was usually fatal for them, their child, or the both of them. Now, I definitely want to give a quick sidebar. If you haven't seen the documentary titled Aftershock, it's on Hulu, and this is a documentary series about the the rate of Black women. I can't even get it out, help me, Lord. About Black and brown women who have died due to preventable deaths regarding pregnancy. I know when I first watched it, it really, really made me angry. Being a woman of color who wasn't physically able to have children, and really understanding the pain that I went through, and going to the doctor and trying to become pregnant, but then seeing these women who had the ability to give birth, but didn't have the opportunity to make it due to the neglect that they experienced in these hospital settings, was very disheartening. So the name of it is titled The Aftershock. It's on Hulu. Okay. So in 1927, a Supreme Court decision which upheld a Virginia law that allowed the sterilization of people considered unfit. This empowered doctors to perform these immoral procedures, for it was another way to decimate the Black population from increasing. In 1960, Fannie Lou Hamer, a civil rights activist from Mississippi, went into the hospital for a tumor to be removed from her uterus. In addition, she received a hysterectomy without her knowledge and consent. On April 10th, 1945, Eb Cade, an African-American male, was the first test subject in the human radiation experiment in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Eb got into a car accident on March 24th, 1945, with fractured bones in his arms and legs. Now, while waiting for treatment on April 10th, he received injections of 5 milligrams of plutonium without his consent. Now, I know there was the most notorious example of experimentation on Black bodies was the Tuskegee syphilis study, in which 400 sharecroppers were denied treatment for syphilis for over 40 years. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service employees recruited hundreds of poor, uneducated African-American men with syphilis and watched them die avoidable deaths over time, even after a cure was found. The discovery of the experiment was made front page in 1972. So it took almost 40 years for somebody to recognize the hardship and the unfair treatment and the experimentation, or 400 Black men Please let that resonate with you, because during this time, there were men who probably didn't have the understanding or the ability to read and write. They were probably saying certain things to them that encouraged them that this was the best thing for them, not knowing that they were putting their lives in danger. Okay, so as recently as the 1900s, unethical and medical research involving African Americans has been conducted on highly esteemed academic institutions. Researchers from prestigious universities recruited African American boys in a study that hypothesized a genetic of aggressive behavior. Through the use of monetary incentives, they were able to convince the parents to enroll their sons in a study that included them to be able to withdraw from all their medications, even asthma, ingesting a low protein diet, overnight stay without their parents, withholding of water, hourly blood draws, and the administration of a drug known to increase the serotonin levels and suspected to be associated with aggressive behaviors. So even within the 1990s, these things are still going on. So when we talk about the distrust of doing research and why it is so prevalent within the communities of color, here are a few examples as to why. Okay. So, as you can see, these historical traumas certainly provide critical context for interpreting present-day occurrences, but attributing distrust primarily to these instances ignore the constant racism that these communities face. Every day, Black and Brown people have their pain denied, their conditions misdiagnosed, and the necessary treatment withheld by physicians because of the biases and the prejudice acts that filtered through healthcare system over the years. Excuse me. So in these moments, the patients are probably not trying to recall historical or generational trauma, but rather contemplating on how an institution sworn to do no harm has failed them and their families, which has really caused what we're talking about today, the absence of trust that healthcare providers and organizations are supposed to genuinely care for patients and their interests. It is their job to set a standard in being honest, practicing confidentiality, and really having the cultural competence and awareness to produce the best possible results. Now, we know that trust in healthcare has declined significantly over the years, and BIPOC communities are less likely to take medical advice, keep follow-up appointments, or even fill prescriptions that are less likely to report in being in poor health. And so when I wrote this statement, it really resonated with me because I hate going to the doctor. If you ask me to go, I'm stubborn. I'm not going to do it until I can't take it anymore. My doctor prescribed me some medication a few weeks ago. It took me almost a week and a half to go and say I'm here picking up my prescription, just because the anxiety and the apprehension of, how is this medication going to affect me? Is it going to help me to get better? But just based off my previous experiences and what I've learned, I was like, oh, you're trying to kill me. And so knowing that that wasn't the case, but that's just how I felt in that moment. So just think about, as a researcher and a health professional, like thinking about how that person feels and being able to step into their shoes. All right, so I want to get a temperature check before we move forward. I want to just for you all to put in a chat box, how are you all feeling? Is this resonating with you? What's going on in your mind right now? You can put 1 or 2 words in the chat box for me. Someone said it's so sad. Thank you for the link. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for being transparent and vulnerable with me today. I know it's a lot that I'm sharing with you, but I'm hoping that you understand the magnitude and what people of color go through on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if you noticed, but there was one point in time when I was speaking, I got a little choked up because these are my people. I think about my father. I think about my brother who just got diagnosed with relapsed multiple sclerosis, and us trying to figure out how we can better support him and making sure that he gets his accommodations as a teacher. I think about my mom, whose story I'll share with you in a few minutes, but I definitely want to thank you all for being transparent and sticking it out with me. We are almost done, but I just appreciate you all engaging. Thank you so much. So next slide for me. Okay, the next slide, absolutely. So I found this quote by Miss Evelyn Hammonds that state, "There has never been any period in American history where the health of Blacks was equal to that of whites. Disparity is built into the system." I wanted to read this to you, for I feel that it mends, no pun intended, the perspective and understanding as to why it's difficult to instill trust in a system that historically damaged these communities. One thing that is important is that trustworthy behavior must be exhibited before trust can be established and given. And this is not just for the physicians or researchers, this is also for the patients and participants. Trust is really a two-way street. Okay, next slide for me. All right. So, attitudinal studies suggest that mistrust of clinical investigators is strongly influenced by sustained racial disparities in health, limited access to healthcare, and negative encounters with healthcare providers. Beliefs about physicians' mistrust among African American patients are reinforced through differential treatment in comparison with whites. Moreover, previous research indicates that a lack of cultural diversity and competency among physicians is a major contributor to African American mistrust of physicians. Now, ethnic minority patients receive less information, empathy, and attention from their physicians regarding their medical care than their white counterparts. With the lack of information, it results really in a limited awareness, knowledge, or even understanding of the availability or value of medical research. Further, studies have illustrated that African American patients are less likely to receive medical services than white patients with similar complaints and symptoms. Okay, next slide for me. All right, so this is my beautiful mom. Her and my father were married for 41 years before he passed away 7 years ago. And today is actually his heavenly birthday. So I definitely want to give a happy birthday to my father. He would have been 74 years old today. So my mom, she was born in Montgomery, Alabama, and raised during the era of Jim Crow laws and the Civil Rights Movement. She's a two-time graduate from Alabama State University. My mom, she is currently 74, and she is still a firecracker. I remember I asked her, I said, "Mom, what was the difference between now and back when you were growing up?" And she looked at me firmly and said, "Cell phones." She said it in a way, she said that the people of color who are being treated now is no different than when it was when I was growing up. Now, when she said it, she had tears in her eyes and her head was hanging down. Now, my mom is not one for tears, but when I asked her what was wrong, she said, "Honestly, I really thought the world would be in a better place, but it seems that we're going back in time." And she said, "Honestly, Hattie, I'm really afraid for you, my son, and my grandson." And of course, me being the empath that I am, she really, really just broke me down to my knees, because it was a very challenging question for me to ask her, because I already knew the answer. But to see your mom tear up with hopes and wanting that the world to be different, but knowing that to her is still the same, and what she experienced growing up as a child, especially in Alabama and Montgomery, it was a very trying time for her. There's a lot of stories that my mom, she just will not share with me. For one, she knows how I am, but two, it's hard for her to relive those moments as a child. Now, growing up, my mom, she talked to me about how her mother and great-grandmother and her grandmother would perform these home remedies for menstrual cycles, fevers, broken bones, burns, etc., really to avoid going to the doctor, for they really came out to these communities. And my grandmother really tried to shelter my mom and her siblings from certain things and people during this time. Now, fast forward 2021, my mom, she contracted COVID. Now in this picture, she was 72 years old. Her health background, my mom has diabetes with the insulin pump. She has COPD. She has congestive heart failure, and she's in stage 3 kidney disease. Now in my mind, I'm like, Lord, sweet baby Jesus, please let this pass over my family, because I know that at that time, like, I didn't have the mental capacity to lose another parent. And so I was praying so hard, like, Lord, please don't let my mom have COVID. But unfortunately, she did. So when I found out that she had it, I dropped everything and I flew home. My mom, who was trying to really self-medicate with those natural remedies that I talked about before, she was praying and listening to church music. And I was like, Mom, that's all well and good, but God is telling us that we need to go to the hospital. So let's put on some clothes and let's get ready to go. And while we were getting ready, I noticed that her oxygen level was between 64 to 67. And for a person who has COPD, that is not good. Her glucose level was going up and down. She had a fever and she barely could make it out the house, to where we had to call the ambulance for her. Now, prior to this, my mom had just received the infusion shot. So we rushed her to the hospital. Now, with the hospital, the reputation wasn't really good. It lacked good bedside manners from the doctors. It was long hours in the ER. Some of the doctors were rude and the nurses were as well. The list goes on. So of course, my anxiety is at an all-time high. And the more and more I looked at my mom, the more that she was not looking well. So the ER doctor comes in and he was very nice, and he says, look, your mom has COVID, but on top of that, she has pneumonia. So I started to freak out. I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to be doing? Like, what's the next step? He said, we need to rush her upstairs where she's critical. So they rushed my mom to the COVID floor, where she stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. And I was literally by my mom's side the entire time. I did not leave the hospital. I think I had on the same shirt, everything, for like 2 weeks. My brother would bring me clothes so that I could stay in the room with her. I don't know. Honestly, that was the grace of God, because I wasn't supposed to be there. So the first 2 days, it was really hard. The most disturbing thing was her first doctor. He was very quiet. He didn't give a lot of information. He barely explained if she was improving or not. Now, my mom, during this time, she's in and out. She has no recollection of time, and she really doesn't know what's going on. So when he's talking, I'm asking him really nicely, like, hey, do you mind explaining that to me? Because I need to communicate this to my brother. So of course, he either gave me a few words or he ignored me completely. So I try to give him, the benefit of the doubt, like, this is a very critical time. I'm sure you have a lot of patience. You've been working long hours and you're really exhausted. But when the third day came in, he barely touched my mom. I hope I'm saying this word right, with a stethoscope. And so, like, I could see that it was barely on her chest. So in my mind, I'm like, how are you hearing her lungs to see if she's improving if you're barely touching her? His mask was under his nose. And then I noticed when he came in, he barely washed his hands and was in and out in 2 minutes. And the reason why I know that it was 2 minutes, because I timed him. And so I said, you know what, I'm not going to be able to stand for this. So I called my brother. I said, I need you to bring me the power of attorney documents ASAP. I said, because how my mom is being treated and what's going on, it's not right. So we went up the chain of command. Lo and behold, he got fired. We got 2 new doctors and a couple of good nurses. So thank you for allowing me to share that story for you. But I really wanted to do that because it's important to critically recognize and acknowledge the impact and ways in which historical events and processes have and continue to shape the present issues. Only then can the contribution and or barriers faced by these communities be successfully broken down. However, it is important that the recognition of historical wrongdoing goes beyond mere performative apologies and leads to an active recognition to today's barriers and underlining inequalities in health. Next slide for me. I'm sorry. Go to the next slide.
Hattie,
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt, but you asked about the time check. So just want to let you know it's 11:46.
Okay, I got you.
All right, thanks.
Next slide for me. All right. So we're going to move quickly because I want to make sure we have time to talk. So it starts with you being able to recognize both universal and cultural specifics that influence participation on how racism operates. It's important for you to become aware of your own attitudes, biases, and prejudices. Please develop a lens for seeing people of color as a source of strength and resilience rather than an experiment or less than human. And we definitely need to make sure that we listen, for we all have biases and the work that we have to do. But it's really important to acknowledge how racism impacts individuals holistically and the identities that intersect. It's much deeper than the hue of one's skin. Okay, next slide for me. All right. So as we close our presentation for today and you begin your call to action journey, I want to encourage you to start with your heart and lead with love. Dr. Amanda Camp wrote a book that says, Say the Wrong Thing, Stories and Strategies for Racial Justice and Authentic Community. And within her book, she developed an acronym that aligned with my own values and the purpose for speaking to you today. So it starts with hold space for transformation, practice unconditional acceptance of what is and who is. Express yourself, share from the heart, although it might be painful for some, but remember your purpose. Act with intention, take action, even if it's imperfect. Reflect on yourself and cultivate self-awareness. And lastly, trust the process. Let yourself and others be uncomfortable. Be gentle with yourself and give yourself some grace. And I always tell people that if your heart and mind are not aligned in being human-centered and lack compassion for all people, you will continue to have the inability to love. And that's to listen, to be open, to be vulnerable and embracing. Okay, next slide for me. So I'm not going to read these to you, but these are just some key takeaways so that if you want to go back and reflect, if you don't want to read through all the presentation, but just some things that are important to you that I wanted to communicate to you throughout this presentation. But I definitely want to read the last line. In order to lead and love, your heart and mind have to be aligned at all times. Okay, next slide for me. So this is, I want to leave you with this quote from one of my favorite gurus on humanistic principles, Mr. Bruce Lee himself. And it states, knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. We have to do the work. So thank you, Mr. Bruce Lee. I'm sure you up there teaching Jesus some karate moves real quick. So I want to move us to our last part of our presentation with the question and answers. So I really appreciate Cheer in the soliciting the questions that they did beforehand. So the first question that I thought was really thought-provoking is like, what barriers have you encountered in connecting with communities of color? But before we go there, I definitely want to open up the floor to you all to see if you have any questions for me or just anything you would like to share in general. I'll turn my camera back on.
So Hattie, I'm just gonna real quick, there was a chat question that came up when you were speaking earlier, before you shared the video, you used a term, and I think it like the sound went out and a couple of people were asking what term you used. But I don't know what it was either.
Was it race lighting or?
That might, You said it was
Microaggressions, yes.
okay.
So that's when I was talking about the 4 levels of how racism operates. We talked about intrapersonal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural.
Great.
I hope
Thank
that
you.
helps.
Thanks, Hattie.
It said, you said you heard a news article. So yes, there was an article, I want to say it was published 2 days ago, and it was from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and they talked about banning all DEI statements across their university because they wanted their students to have intellectual freedom about what it means to be a conservative citizen. And I don't know if you all have read the book Dog Whistle, but through the whole man's speech, it was so many dog whistles that he was giving out. And a dog whistle is just another term used to shield what they really mean. Because nobody wants to be exposed for the hatred or for how they feel about people of color. So that's the term that we hear a lot of people say is they're using a dog whistle. So, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Any questions or comments? I'm pumped now. I'm ready to go.
Hattie, I don't know if you had the opportunity to see, but lots of folks in the chat wished your dad a happy heavenly birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that very personal part of your story.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, Paula, don't make me cry right now. I can't do it.
You're getting so many compliments in the chat, Hattie. I hope you can see these, that everyone is really enthusiastic about the information that you share. Well, enthusiastic about the delivery of the information that you shared today, and the importance of us taking action based on what you've encouraged us to do today.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody taking the time out and being on this call. I hope that there was something that resonated with you, the story that I shared, and just these historical moments concerning our communities. I love what I do, and I love educating and training people and, being able to partner. So this was great for me as well.
Hattie, I have a question actually though about
yes, ma'am.
I know I've heard statistics about like lifespan, like actual lifespan of communities of color versus the suburbs that are close by and folks that live there. Do you have any information about that to speak on?
I just read something when I was doing the research for this. I can't recollect where I got it from, but the life expectancy of people of color is far more less than whites. Just because, for one, as you can see, we're trying to go back to our ancestors and get all these natural remedies, and not saying that those are not effective, but also it's the health literacy part, having an understanding and an awareness of what can we ask for. So a lot of times when we go to the doctor, we don't know the right questions to ask. And so I have to go back to my mom when I go home and I go with her to the doctor, and the doctor comes on like, okay, what you want to talk about? And my mom, she's just sitting there like, well, everything's going great. And I'm like, everything is not going great. You need to tell them X, Y, and Z. So I feel like if patients don't have the health literacy and the understanding of what's going on within their bodies, that affects the longevity of them and still being human beings on this earth, right? So I know that the life expectancy of Black and Brown people are far more or less than those of whites. It's a lot of factors that are out there, but I can definitely get that research for you. So that's a really good question. But I feel like it really starts, one of the reasons is because we're not educated enough about what's going on with our bodies, nor do we get the right information as well on how to care for our bodies once we encounter certain things. So like I said, we just take it upon ourselves to do what we feel is right. And a lot of times we don't know and we just shut down in that communication to where we don't know how to advocate for ourselves. So, excuse me, I'm sure there's a lot of research out there. That's a good question, Jess.
I think there's a few other questions, Hattie. I don't know if you want me to read them to you in the chat.
Absolutely.
So one person asked, Sean, how do we best respond to the anti-woke movement without being negatively labeled by members of that movement?
Honestly, Sean, I'm still trying to figure that out myself, because I think this is another way that society has taken a word that's supposed to be empowering and elevating the voices of Black and Brown people and turning it into a way that is dehumanizing to the white culture, right? And that's not what it is. Being woke is really just having an understanding of how people are treated within society, but really understanding the historical and just their day-to-day and how we talk about white supremacy, white nationalists, all these things have impacted our culture and our mindset. And I feel like because people are anti-woke, I consider them those who are not willing to step into the shoes of those who have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed, but they're not really to understand the history or wanting to learn about it. Because I tell people that Black history is American history. If you think about the inventions and everything that we are moving about, from the HVAC, peanut butter, air conditioner, the fridge, all these things, Black people invented that because we had to survive, right? And so when people don't want to take the time to listen and understand and acknowledge, of course you don't want to be anti-woke, because then eventually you're going to be exposed. And so I too have a difficult time in engaging in those conversations, because once again, here you are trying to suppress what it really means to be a person of color in America. I hope that makes sense.
Hattie, you are awesome. You are so engaging. We're seeing comments, people saying, can we continue this conversation? In a lot of different ways, people are asking questions about even parenting, like with it looks like a biracial son. Unfortunately, time is getting away from us. So about how to handle driving. Okay, so Brianna's asking about, she would love to discuss with you how to handle himself. He's pulled over as a biracial because he's biracial. So that's something. Do you have any advice? And I'm so sorry, it's 11:59. So I'm wondering, do you think it would be okay, Hattie, if people who have additional questions, could they reach out to you directly? Or
absolutely.
A lot of people are asking or requesting that maybe we continue this discussion in this forum.
I would love that.
Yeah, I think that would be amazing too. There's just, you're fantastic. And, you know, obviously you're making people feel very safe to speak about this topic. And we need to be able to speak openly and vulnerably about it together, be unafraid to say or ask questions, right? And make mistakes. So I can't thank you enough for creating that for us today, Hattie, and sharing all of your personal experiences and just really teaching all of us too about systemic racism and the historical atrocities that have happened in Black and Brown communities that lead to, and very much are still happening today, but have led us to why we're in the position that we are in today. So I can't thank you enough. Real quick, I hope, guys, I know it's 12 o'clock on the dot. I just want to share with you, cheer, we do support inclusivity. There's different ways. We're going to send this whole PowerPoint slide to you so you can read this on your own, but we're really working to create more inclusivity within the College of Medicine and our work. That's listed right there. Jen, if you want to go ahead to the next one, you can read that on your own. We do have some upcoming programming. Next month, this is more of a researcher type session specifically about updating recruitment strategies and thinking outside the box. Again, that's going to be for researchers. We'll send out a notice to sign up for that, of course, in the upcoming weeks. Jen, if you want to go ahead. And then finally, if you have any questions, you can contact our group. I think, though, again, based on the feedback we're getting already, I think that this is a topic that we really, really need to continue this conversation. It is super important. Hattie, I think everybody, I think it's appropriate for me to say that we want you to be part of that conversation every time. And all of us here today, because we need to do this work together. We need to do it. And the conversation has to continue. So Hattie, did you have any closing remarks?
No, I'm just so overwhelmed right now. Like I feel like running around in my apartment. So thank you everybody for your transparency and getting hot with me today. I'm so grateful. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Hattie B, McCarter. If there's an opportunity that you would love to connect via phone or email, I would love to do that. I wish you all the best. I value everybody on this call. Thank you for stepping in and trying to bridge the gap. I hope you all have a wonderful and blessed week. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining us today.